Hello there and thanks for joining me. I'm digital artist Aaron Rutten, and in this video I'm going to be reviewing BlackInk digital art software. I haven't read any instructions, I'm just going to dive into it and see if I can figure it out. Now what's different about BlackInk compared to other art applications is that BlackInk uses generative art brushes. That's kind of a technical term that basically means there's a bunch of different properties that you can link together in different ways. The specialty of this application is that its brushes are a lot more abstract and not based on traditional or realistic media, although you certainly can create traditional looking brushes, and there are some included as well. So I have a blank canvas that opens up here. My initial impressions are that the UI is pretty compact. It doesn't take up a whole lot of room. It's dark, which I like, and the canvas is very prominent here. I don't like that everything is crammed over here on the right, but I suppose I could move it all over to the left if I wanted to. We have what looks like our brush palette up here in the top, then a preview of the brush, then some properties to change how the brush functions. Then up here at the top, we have our standard toolbar with some different options here. And of course, our file menu. Kind of cool how the menus fade in and out like that. So you got your standard stuff up here in the top, kind of limited options, but that's because I'm using the trial version. This is also still in beta. So let's go ahead and test out a brush. Here's felt pen 4 pixels. We'll go ahead and draw with it. The drawing is very smooth. I don't notice a whole lot of lag or anything like that. Pen pressure works really well. Very nice response. Let's try another brush here. We have the Airbrush. Nice Airbrush responds well to pressure, size, and opacity. I like to use a really big airbrush, so let's see if we can increase the size. Bracket keys aren't working. Normal shortcut keys are not working. Let's try Shift. Now Shift is just letting me draw a straight line, and that's kind of cool. It locks my brush to the different angles here, so I could very easily draw a line and then start another point here and have it lock into specific angles like that. That's a pretty cool feature, I think. It makes drawing these lines feel a lot more natural. Another thing I notice is that as you're drawing the stroke, it kind of doesn't really ever finish. It begins and ends. I start to see a little bit of glitching over here, but that's okay. So that's kind of neat. Let's see if we can figure out how to resize the brush. There's got to be a way to do that. This is the color sampler, which is pretty neat the way that works. Of course, I can change the brush size over here, but that's not exactly what I want. I want to be able to make a really big brush. Doesn't look like I can do that, so that's kind of a bummer. Being able to make a really big airbrush is essential to being able to paint for me, so that's disappointing. I'm going to go ahead and look under the preferences, and then keyboard. Well, looking through the keyboards, I'm not seeing any obvious option to resize my brush, so I'm going to assume that that's not here or it's just buried somewhere where I don't know about it. Let's dig around a bit in the preferences while we're in here. We'll look under General. There's Auto Recovery, that's good, and we can easily open the Auto Recover folder. We can also change the path if we want to, and we can change the interval of how often it saves. So that's pretty cool. There's also a little timer that counts down showing you when your backup's going to happen. Let's take a look at Stylus now, and we can see that we can erase with the current brush. We can see some information about our tablet. We can also calibrate our cursor if there's any offset to compensate for that. Then we can see a preview of our brush. So we can test our pressure here. I could use a very, very light pressure, and very, very heavy pressure, maximum pressure, and then I can see that I can get a nice smooth curve here. Now if I tilt my pen, I can get some different results too. And the azimuth, I'm not sure what that is. Maybe that's the bearing of the brush. Who knows? But all 3 of those functions are working because I'm using the Wacom Pro pen. Let's look under GPU now. This particular application is utilizing DirectX 11, and it looks like it's utilizing my video card, which is good. So what that means is because it's utilizing my GPU, it's going to work a lot faster. And I can see that the brushes are pretty quick, but I have yet to be able to make a really big brush. So at the biggest brush, it's still pretty snappy compared to a lot of other applications. Not a whole lot of lag there, but I would really like to see what it does with a bigger brush. So I'll see if I can find one. I'm going to go ahead and change my color here by going to Color, and then I can click here to bring up my color picker. I can go ahead and lock that to keep it in place. In my color picker, I have some color wells. I have my standard cube here, which has hue, saturation, and lightness. And then there's sliders for each of those that are dynamic. That's nice to see. I can also see my RGB and my HSV values as well as my hex values. I can copy and paste the hex values and change the values numerically. I can also change my opacity here. I can also switch to the triangle mode, which I like, although the triangle is kind of at an angle. I don't like that, but you know what? That's better than nothing. And then as I pick different colors, those will appear here in my history, so I can easily get back to a previous color. I'm going to go ahead and put down some color with my airbrush here. Pick a blue color, put some of that down. It's interesting how the color picker kind of grays out as you're painting. Maybe that's to make it less distracting. Kind of an interesting feature. It actually grays out as soon as you stop hovering over it. I put these two colors down because I want to try the next brush, which is a blender called Smudge Colored. So we'll go ahead and smudge. It looks like it smudges, but with adding color. So if I were to pick color like this and then smudge, it's smudging while adding color. So it's kind of like an oily brush, I guess. Let's try Free Fill Default. Now this is one of the abstract brushes where you just kind of keep painting with it and it starts to invert upon itself and you can make some pretty interesting stuff. Not all that impressed by that brush. Moving on to the next one, we have Angle Line Fill. Another abstract brush. This one could be kind of fun for just creating some interesting stuff where you're not trying to necessarily draw realistically, you're trying to let happy accidents happen. You could really easily draw landscapes with plants and mountains and stuff. This could be a fun brush to use. Next to that, we have an eraser. And as you can imagine, it erases. I'm going to clear my canvas with Select All and then hit Delete. Now, if I hit this little triangle here, then it expands down and there's more brushes, including some of the same ones that I already picked. Let's try Charcoal Black. Really nice brush. I like the way this one looks. I'm going to make it a bit smaller in the scale. Has an interesting texture to it. Now, I'm not really able to do dabs with these brushes, I'm noticing. So that's not working. Dabbing I find is very important in painting, so maybe there's a way to do that that I'm not aware of, but doesn't seem to want to dab. Let's try the next brush, which is Smudge Charcoal. Smudgy brush. Does kind of start to add paint though, so I guess it's a charcoal, it's a smudgy charcoal brush, it's not necessarily a blender. Kind of interesting, kind of the same quality of smudging that you would get in Corel Painter, so I can see that there is some potential for the blenders here as far as looking realistic. Next is a pattern, and these are all kind of mixed in with the brushes, which I think is kind of weird, but what this does is you draw with it and then you drag your pen. If you drag it to the left, the pattern gets bigger dynamically, and if you drag it all the way over to the right, then it starts to get smaller, and then you can kind of start to rotate it too. But you can get a very fine pattern like sand, or you can get something like scales. Now, I guess this is for abstract art if you wanted to make a background. And as I mentioned, these are all kind of mixed in, so here's another one, different kind of pattern. It's kind of a cool feature. I like this a lot for creating random backgrounds. And then you can, of course, control the colors in that gradient as well by clicking here and choosing the color of the gradient that you want. So if you want that to be, let's say, red instead, then you can create a red gradient. Let's move on to Random Color Shift Textured. I guess this just changes the color of whatever you're painting on and adds a bit of texture. That's kind of a fun feature. You could add a little bit of life to your color while you're painting. Next is Organic Pen Default. Nice pen that kind of has a little bit of lumpiness to it, so it's not completely perfect. If I make that a very thin pen, you can see it does look nice and organic. Very nice pens. Now let's try Tail. It's kind of a particle brush, I guess. So I'm not going to go through all of these brushes. If you want to download the demo, you can do that, but I'll just scroll down and you can kind of get a feel for how many brushes there are. A good chunk of these are patterns and not all brushes, but there's quite a few different brushes that are pretty cool. I'll just show you a couple more just so you can get a feel for what this can do. Let's try a paintbrush. Not a very impressive paintbrush, but again, this isn't really trying to look like natural media per se. It's just supposed to be a digital brush that you can use. There's Smudge Expanded, so we can smudge without actually using any color. There's a ruffle brush. You can get some pretty interesting ruffled results. And then there's some dots. You can create dots. So really lots of kind of design style brushes and not a whole lot of traditional media brushes. So now let's take a look at adjusting some of the brushes. There's some of the obvious properties like opacity and size, and we can scale on the X and Y axis so we can make a brush taller or wider if we wanted to. So for example, this brush can make it really skinny and tall like this, as you can see in the preview. I'll need to change the gradient color to a different color so that we can see this a little more easily. Now if we paint, you can see that I get that really nice pattern. So I could use this for something like hatching if I wanted to. If we wanted to put it at an angle, we could add some rotation. So now we could have these angled strokes if you wanted something that looks kind of like rain. Let's check out flow. We turn scatter down, it kind of builds up on itself more. The live preview here does a pretty good job of showing you what's going to happen too. Shape interval, I guess, just kind of changes up the shape while you're painting. I'm going to go back to shape. I'm going to increase the size a bit. Kind of a cool brush. You could maybe use it for feathers or hair or something. Now I just happen to notice in the preview of the brush here, there's a little slider where you can make the background color lighter or darker. That's pretty cool. So you can see the color against different background colors. You can also draw your stroke in here. That's pretty cool. And then you can play it back. So I see you draw your stroke and then you can play it and then you go, oh, okay, that's what the brush does. That is a really, really, really cool feature, I have to say. Let's try a different brush. Here's a dotted line. Pretty cool effect. I like this. This would be fun for drawing diagrams and stuff like that. Let's see if we can get some more properties here. Let's go to Window, Controller Editor. All right, so I admit I had to take a minute to watch a tutorial to know how to use this, but you know what? That's what you have to do for any art application. That's probably why you're watching this video to begin with. So down here in the Controller Editor, we have some different properties over here on the left and some different ones that we can change over here on the right, such as hue, saturation value, size, etc. If we click on size, then we can see that for this particular brush, which is called Simple Round Pen, that we can control size with pressure, ease power, ease cubic, and smoothing. So right now, if I do a stroke with this brush using firm to light pressure, then I get a tapered stroke. But rather than pressure, I could change it to something like tilt. And now I can control the size of the pen with the tilt of my pen. So I'm tilting my pen at different angles and it's getting thinner or wider depending on the tilt. So this is very much like the sliders in Corel Painter or Photoshop and other applications. It is rather than having simple sliders, they have this really confusing linkage of things. And maybe this is an advantage in some way. So let's change it from tilt back to pressure. Let's change the smoothing now if we want the brush to spread the pressure out evenly or have it just kind of happen a little more abruptly. So for example, I could turn this smooth editor all the way up. Now if I do a stroke, you can see that it starts out very smooth and it ends very wide. I turn the factor all the way down the other way. Then I get a stroke that's kind of like this. I can go between thick and thin pretty easily, but smoothing will just kind of blend that out. And so the transition happens a little more smoothly. And we can control the ease of which we go in and out of pen pressure as well. We could have ease in power all the way down. And then it's really hard to get a very thin line. If we turn ease power all the way up, then it's pretty easy now. I don't have to press too hard and I can get that thin line with very, very light pressure. So you have a lot of control over your pen. It's really good for calibrating the perfect stroke. All right, so back in the brush creator here with that simple round brush. If you want to reset the settings, you can just click on the reset button and you can reset the properties here too. Let's go ahead and add a behavior scheme. Let's set that to time noise and then load. And now it's added some properties to size. Now time controls the noise or the jitter of the brush. So now we have this jittery brush. And if it's a bit too jittery, then we can edit the noise. We can decrease the amplitude and then we get a more shallow jitter. If we want it to be really jittery, we can increase the amplitude. And now it's a really fractured brush. We can, of course, control all these other options as well. We can stretch out the wave. You can see a little example down here. So now when we draw with this, it's a little bit more spread out. We'll reduce the amplitude and you can see that you get a lot of control. So having all these nodes gives you a lot more control. It may be a little bit more intuitive to see how it works, as opposed to a lot of the sliders and other art applications that don't give you as much visual feedback. So even though it is a lot more complicated and a lot more esoteric, you have a lot more control, and it's almost in some ways easier to know what you're going to get when you change a brush. So I can see the advantages to this node-based system. So because I'm not really an expert on building brushes, I don't know all of the different properties, and there's probably a million different properties in here, I'm not going to try to do anything too complicated as far as creating brushes, but you can feel free to experiment and there's lots of tutorials out there that BlackInk has created that'll show you how to do more complicated things. Gone ahead and opened the brush manager here, which I guess is just the same as this other palette. And we can show more of our brushes all at once. We can search for brushes, that's pretty cool. We can switch to default or user brushes. There's also filters if we want to take out fills and things like that. Then we can have just the brushes showing. We can also sort them alphabetically like this. That's kind of cool. Let's take a look at our layer manager now. That pops up over here on the left, and we have control over our layers. We can add layers. We can move layers around. We can change the fill. We can transform a layer. We can merge visible, merge all. We can export and import images. We can delete layers. We can duplicate layers. We can add layers above. We can merge down. So most of your basic layer commands can be done here. There's also opacity and composite methods. So you can have your stroke work in different ways. For example, color. I could choose blue here. And then if I move my layer in the right order, then I can change just the color of what's underneath this layer. So when I paint on the white area, it doesn't do anything. It just changes the red to blue when I paint over the red, basically. And I did that by changing the blend mode of the stroke, and you can actually change that on the fly here to different modes. You can, of course, reduce the opacity of those strokes. And if you want to delete that, you can delete it. Down here at the bottom, I noticed that there's a timer, and that timer seems to be running out, which means that when the timer runs out, the trial is probably going to close. It's definitely a handicapped trial. It's not fully functional. Let's go ahead and see what other panels we have here. There's secondary view, brush preview, which I guess is what we were looking at over on the right. Brush pixel shader editor. Let's see what that does. Don't know what that does, so I'm going to assume that that's probably for creating brushes. And preferences and log. Okay, so I think that covers it for the window menu and the palettes. I don't really see anything else that I can pop up here in this version. I'm going to draw a circle here now, and we can try some of the properties up here. There's undo, redo, there's clear the layer. We can copy merged, we can cut, we can paste. Nice tool tips here. We can zoom in and out, we can pan, we can rotate our canvas if we want to. Double click to reset it. We can flip the canvas horizontally. We can flip the canvas vertically. We can toggle a view constant brush size. So for example, that's off right now. So if I draw a line, it's going to be this wide. And if I zoom out of my canvas really far, go back to my brush and draw, that brush is still going to be the same size. If I zoom in really close and I draw, brush is the same size. However, if I turn this on now, I can hit the Y key if I want to, then the brush is going to stay the same size no matter what my zoom level is. So now if I zoom out and I draw, then the brush is still the same size in proportion to how it was before. Now if I zoom in really close and I draw a brush stroke, then you can see that that brush stroke remains the same size. The way the zoom tool works is you drag to zoom in and zoom out. I guess that's okay. I kind of prefer the old method of zooming in and out by holding Alt or zooming in just by clicking. But I guess that's all right by me. I'll go ahead and draw another example here, and we'll take a look at select and transform. There are selections, which we can use to select areas, just like you have in most applications. There's the ellipse mode as well, and then polygonal lassos. This mode here will let you select the layer content, so it'll just put a selection on the pixels that are on that layer. That's pretty cool. And then we can transform. There's a bounding box like you get in most applications. It's automatically locking your aspect ratio. I don't see a way to break that by holding a modifier key. It doesn't look like there's a property for it either. However, you can grab these side things and then you can squish it, so that's kind of cool. If you hover over the corners, you can rotate it. So your standard transform properties, you can hit enter to go ahead and apply that. Now it left that little box in the middle because I guess when I selected the layer contents, it didn't select everything. So select layer content perhaps does not work as well as it should. I can also crop my canvas using a very similar method. I can drag those same boxes and then I can crop it down, hit enter to commit. Looks like next to that, I can fill my canvas with colors if I want to. So I could pick, let's say, red and fill my canvas with red very quickly. I can choose to fill inside or outside of layers that have alpha. And if I switch to my brush and I select black, I can do freeform drawing. or I can do snap drawing. So it looks like I can just draw straight lines like this just by dragging the line. That's pretty cool, and it snaps to different points that have already been put down, so that's pretty neat. You can choose the snap radius, you can show straight line info, and then you have some control over the different options here. Next is smoothness, and so I'll switch back to freeform drawing mode. I'm going to go back to just a regular pen, and smoothness will slow down your brush, make it a little bit slower so it's a little bit smoother, and you can see this star is kind of showing you if you were to trace over that star how it would smooth your edges. So right now, if I try to draw a star like this, then I'm getting pretty sharp corners if I want them. However, if I add a bunch of smoothness and I try to do that same thing, then it's a bit rounded, and you can see that the brush kind of lags behind the pen. So that works really well if you want to draw very, very smooth circles and lines. Next to that is the snap angle, and we can change the intervals of that. We already looked at that. That's just when you hold shift, you can snap it like that. Pretty cool feature for drawing straight lines. And then we have the show palette here. We can show the controller editor, we can show the brush manager, layer manager, secondary view, and then the docked panel. So that's basically everything that I pulled up in the menu here that's available over on the left and on the right. So before I go, I'll just quickly draw a quick little abstract painting using one of these brushes that I like a lot. I'm going to use angle fill line, and let's do kind of a black and white landscape. So I know here in the foreground, I'm going to want to indicate some land, and this is kind of a happy accident brush. So you just kind of let stuff happen with it. So I could put in some little bushes here like this. And if some stuff happens that I wasn't expecting, I'll just kind of deal with it. It's making, bigger strokes and different shape strokes than I'm expecting to get here. So we got a little bit of stuff in the foreground here. And let's say our horizon is maybe going to be right around here. I'll just hold shift to put that in a little indication of that. And I like how it kind of broke up the line too. That's nice. And let's say maybe there is going to be a little indication of some hills here. And then behind that, we'll have a nice big mountain, kind of like that, just kind of indicating where that is. Divide those mountain peaks here, and then we'll say that this is going to be our shadow side. So I'm just painting back and forth, building it up on itself to get that nice texture. Go ahead and do that on this shadow side as well. The brush is a little unruly, but you know what? That's okay, because this is going to be a more abstract looking piece. And then I'll just put in some little details here on these hills in the foreground. And maybe in the sky, we can have some clouds. Pretty interesting effects that you get here. Maybe up here we'll have a big tree, so I'll just kind of poke in some little tree shapes. Now, I do notice that my paint can go off my canvas. That's kind of interesting, how you can see your strokes. I suppose if you render it out, then you probably wouldn't see that stuff. So let's say that that's going to be our tree. And we'll just have some little grassy stuff that kind of fills in here. But what you're getting here when you're painting with this abstract brush is spontaneity, and spontaneity really helps in artwork. Sometimes your stuff can look a bit too intentional and it lacks character. I'm going to switch to white. I'm going to clean up some of that area there that I overpainted. We bring back in a little more detail. Okay, so that's my quick demo painting. It's not a masterpiece by any means, but it gives you an idea of kind of what you can do with some of these brushes. I'm going to go ahead and save this now. Now my save options are going to be a little bit limited because this is a trial version, so I'm going to go to Save As. I can save this as a native BlackInk document, or I can choose PNG, JPEG, or JPEG with an extra letter there. So those aren't really the best options. It would be nice if there were more options like TIFF and PSD, and perhaps there are in the full version, but not in the trial version. So there you go, that's my review of BlackInk digital art software. If you enjoyed this video, take a quick second to click the like button. And if you're new to my channel, I'd love to have you subscribe. I release several new digital art videos each week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.